أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. Well, this is me doing another riff. This time I'm going to try to drink my morning coffee while I do it. I want to start a conversation about my 30-year preoccupation with our mother Hajar, mother of Ismail, alayhim salam. She was, for all intents and purposes, the wife of Ibrahim, alayhi salam. We'll talk about that as we go along. I want to talk about the fact that I have been engaged in developing my ideas around our mother Hajar for 30 years. I want to talk a little bit about the development of the ideas and how personal they are to me, especially because after that 30 years, all I get is a sensation on the basis of 3 words, deadbeat dad, as I asked in a rhetorical question, what do we do with this deadbeat dad? I also asked about Sarah. What do we do with this Sarah the bitch? And what do we do with this benevolent God? So actually, that rhetorical question had points in it that were, in my estimation, a little bit more radical than this thing about Ibrahim. But just to show you how the patriarchy works in our community, the deadbeat dad got the most play. So let's go. You know, my activism began in earnest in 1989 when I moved to Malaysia, and I became one of 8 founding members of Sisters in Islam, an organization to fight patriarchy in Islam through Islam, which is still ongoing. And in 1993, the United Nations decided to designate the next year as the year of the family. Now, by this time, I was very deeply entrenched in recognizing how the meaning of a word was always situated, was always constructed. And when you get to keywords for things like patriarchy, feminism, Islam, and in this case, family, I realized that it was important to question how it was that the United Nations was defining that term, family. I surmised, keeping up with it, that the concept of family as it was used was the patriarchal nuclear family, and that notion of family was not universal. So that when the UN proposes the year of the family, there are many families that would be further oppressed by the meaning that the United Nations was applying to the word family. So I became very interested in how we understand complex family structures, and not only understand them, how we validate them as part of the nurturance of, other human beings. So if you define family as the, collective unit that nurtures the well-being of others, it allows for what in the queer context we call chosen families, that not all families are just going to be biologically related to who was the biological father, who was the biological mother, and from that, who were the biological siblings. So my personal reason for challenging this notion of the patriarchal, often hegemonic nuclear family notion was that I was not in one myself. In fact, I was moving into my second divorce. Keep in mind that I chose divorce in both cases after roughly 7 years in each marriage, because, and this is where the story gets deep, I loved my father. My mother and father stayed in the marriage till death did them part. It's true, my father, who died at 47, died early by all calculations. But my father impressed upon my mother that he was the breadwinner and caretaker, the provider. And so she was not to work. He did not want her to work out of the house. Obviously, she worked in the house, which is, again, part of understanding the politics of the use of the word work. He did not want her to work out of the house. And yet, as the number of children increased, his capacity to pay all the bills got reduced more and more. So I experienced in my childhood both the notion of a continual dual parent household and extreme experiences and traumatic experiences of poverty. I'm not going to detail those, but it included, homelessness for 2 months and being separated from my mother for a year because she wouldn't come back until my father got it together and bought a new house, so that we had no challenge, hopefully, again, of that experience of abject homelessness. One where I'm 10 years old and I walk home and there's a lock on my door because, my father hasn't paid the mortgage on the land. And so they repossessed it. So in my love for my father, I neglected to see that he was a poor provider. I neglected it so much that I then went and married 2 poor providers. Now, if you think a person is a poor provider when you have a dual parent unit that is both working to make provisions for the family, if you think they're a poor provider, then all you have to do is divorce them. So what I had experienced and what I was challenged with this notion of family, we're going to have the year of the family. What I had experienced is that although I was the mother of 5 children, I could not rely upon the male parent of those children, in this case, the 2 of them. I could not rely upon them to be providers and protectors of those children because they had not been providers and protectors of me when I bore those children during the marriages with them. And this is a very sensitive point for me because what happens in most Muslim contexts is that shame is heaped upon the single female head of household. In most cases, we are assuming that somewhere out there was a sperm donor, and in those cases, we also presume that there was a marriage between the mother and the sperm donor. And so somehow she must have done something wrong if she's not still married to that sperm donor. That's the general tenor of the attitude with regard to this that happens. Now, I found that strange. And not only that, I experienced some horrible things with regard to it, because once again, my assumption of the Muslim community was that in any case, our love for community and for family, and especially for children, was so great that we would do anything to make sure that they are supported, both in terms of a responsible, financially consistently providing father, and by a notion of financial assistance with regard to community. I actually applied for zakat funds from a mosque one time as a single parent, and I was in fact attacked for just being a single female head of household, and I was not given the zakat that I was applying for. In fact, I wasn't even given the dignity of a response letter to my request, a response that said, no, we are not going to do this for you. I was so totally erased and ignored that it is just an experience, again, double layers of shame heaped upon me for the audacity to try to be the residential parent and raise my children when I was not able to tolerate maintaining the marriage. Because again, their expression of it from the outside is always that divorce is the woman's fault, she was lacking, and therefore the man pronounced the talaq. In my case, I requested the pronouncement of the talaq because it's a greater facility at terminating, the Islamic marriage. In fact, I wrote that into my second marriage contract because I had such trouble getting the first husband to pronounce the talaq. So there I was, a single mother, 5 children, struggling, continue to struggle. My eldest is now 47. So if I got 7, maybe close to 8 years out of the 2 marriages, that's 15 years. You do the math. So this is real for me. This is very real. This is very personal. And that's another reason why I find the patriarchal, misogynist manipulation of those 3 words to be so offensive. So then I came to Hajar. The interesting thing is that there are other aspects of the story of Hajar which are interesting to me. For example, as a Black woman who descended from enslaved peoples, and that is her status as a slave and as a person who, we don't know for sure, but for all intent and purposes, we get the feeling that she's a person of African origin, so Black. So there are aspects of the story that other scholars, especially womanist scholars, have engaged in. I did not engage in all of these aspects as fully as I engaged in the notion of what happens to a woman who is wedded, and in this case, I'm going to use becomes the sexual partner to a great man who coincidentally already has a sexual partner in Sarah. What happens to a woman who partners with this man, and as a consequence of the partnership, does in fact reproduce a child, a male child, a child who goes on to be a prophet in his own right, alayhi salam. What happens to her when every aspect of the community dialogue asserts a notion of protection and provision as the duty of the male partner slash sperm donor slash father, and the mother is taken out to the desert with all of the descriptions of lack that goes with that desert. What happens when she is taken out there and abandoned there with a nursing baby? If we cannot reflect on that, then we lack a certain level of compassion. Yes, I know that people talk about this was by the will of Allah, that Abraham did what Allah asserted, that Hajar herself and the child all embrace the notion of the benevolent God when they're there. But let's be real, people. Poverty is real. Poverty affects billions of people. And the outcome of that poverty is devastating. If we ignore that devastation because we also believe in a benevolent God, it means we take no responsibility as humans of better means, which is the notion of zakat in Islam. After all, a purification of your wealth results in your giving 2.5% of your excess against those who are in poverty. When I say against, I mean against the poverty that they experience and for them. So in other words, we have encoded in our 5 pillars a responsible and compassionate relationship to those who experience poverty, who experience lack. And yet, when this woman, who, let's be frank, entered into a relationship as a slave, meaning there were elements of non-consensual participation, when she enters into it and bears a child who is then claimed for the household of Ibrahim, that is, Ibrahim through Sarah can claim this child for the heritage that they will receive through that child, even though Sarah doesn't participate, in the act of reproduction of that child. She's the mistress of the household. Slavery, we keep that in mind, all right? So she does all of this, and yet she's still abandoned in the desert. So I began to focus on this in order to construct what I called in a chapter from a book that was published in 2006 inside the Gender Jihad. In it is a chapter with the name, A New Hajar Paradigm. It is to this new Hajar paradigm that I will return in my next riff. I have to do this in parts because it was 30 years, people, 30 years working on this conception, 30 years of really intimately relating to the implications of this experience of this woman with a nursing baby that I find so poignant with regards to the issue of how we idealize the notion of family. Thank you.